Kia ora everybody, welcome to this episode of the Stag, episode 39, and for this episode we're interviewing Lucas Krump from Evryman. Those of you who have listened to episode 35, I answered a question from Joseph Morris, who is one of my influences at the moment, and one of those influences is Dan Doty from Evryman, and Lucas is the co-founder with Dan of Evryman, and so this is an absolute pleasure to speak with Lucas because Evryman is something that resonates really, really highly with me. At the end of the podcast, Lucas sort of flips it around and asks why it is that Evryman is resonating with men in Australia and New Zealand, and I sort of came up with an answer at the time, but I've since had an opportunity to think a little bit deeper about it, and for those of you who have checked out my blog, you would have seen that I've explored the topic a few times about what it's like to be a man, also what it's like to be an individual within New Zealand. In particular, the blog I wrote about for Seed Waikato and how that was formed. One of the things that I was facing when we moved to the Waikato was a little bit of isolation, a lack of connection, a lack of meaningful friendships, I guess. Having moved around a lot, played in various different rugby teams, I know a lot of people, but I'm probably a little bit short on deep and meaningful friendships. Those out there that I do have deep and meaningful friendships with, I'm super lucky, but unfortunately both I've moved around a lot, and those people are scattered throughout the country and throughout the world. So, moving to a place like the Waikato, it was reasonably isolating, especially when your older brother you move there to be close to moves away to Christchurch, where you've just come from. The other thing that I did touch on is that New Zealand's, and Australia, I guess, has got a real sense of adventure about it, and the term mateship is something that's really strong within New Zealand and Australian culture, as well as the terms bloke, I guess, and perhaps something that as we've become more urbanised as a society and away from that sort of rural culture that we were, that pioneering culture that we were, mateship has fallen by the wayside. Our sense of neighbourhood as well has fallen by the wayside, which is probably something that our communities, as we were a young country, really prided themselves on. So I think this men's work is something that really resonates with who we are as a culture in Australasia, both New Zealand and Australia, and that mateship, that blokeship really rings true. So I think that's why Lucas and Dan are finding that they're having plenty of people reach out from this part of the world. Anyway, without further ado, this is an awesome conversation. We dive deep into a lot of things, and it's really cool to have someone on the podcast who's got a little bit of experience with having a deep dive and going deep with feelings and thoughts and what it is to be a man. So hope you really enjoy this. I loved talking with Lucas, and here it goes. Kia ora everybody. We're sitting down with Lucas Krump from Evryman. Unfortunately, Lucas is fortunately for Lucas, he's in Nicaragua, so we're not going to have the video for this because we don't want to lose the quality message that Lucas is going to convey to us today. But Lucas, before we start, I just mentioned it there. I usually start with asking what you've done in the weekend, but being just after July 4th, what have you been doing for Independence Day and your time away?
Yeah. Ironically, I was reflecting. I've actually been in Nicaragua for the last 3 Independence Days in a row. This time I'm actually down here with my brother, his wife, and my 3 nephews, 9, 11, and almost 13. And what did we do? We surfed yesterday. We surfed and hung out. You know, couldn't have asked for a better day. Um, yeah, nothing too patriotic, but fun nonetheless.
Absolutely. And you put up a pretty cool photo of one of your nephews wearing a groovy hat. You said something like 6 years old, going on 21 or 41
Yeah,
or something like that.
yeah, 11 going on 25. That's the middle one, Ellis, who seemingly most identifies with his uncle, and so he, it's for me, it's been really interesting. I was showing them a video of one that my stepfather shot 10 years ago, and it's amazing to be able to watch these three boys grow up and sort of form their own personalities and their own identities. It's such a fun experience for me as an uncle. I don't have any children of my own, so I've really enjoyed that.
Nice. And so, how do you find it being an uncle? Where do you see your influence coming through, or the brother that you know coming through in this next generation? How does that sort of feel, and what do you see with that?
Well, it's an interesting, and I'd say that my role, as an uncle, has evolved over the years. There was certainly a time when I was younger, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, that oftentimes the way that I would relate to my nephews was, through sort of comedy and adventure, and we'd kind of joke around a lot, and I'd make them laugh, and that would sort of be the way we would connect. But I realized probably more and more that I was using that sort of comedy as a way to kind of distance myself from really actually telling them how I feel and what I feel towards them. And so, I think what I've really noticed more and more is how much my influence as an uncle has on them. And it's really forced me to be way more aware of the impact of my behavior and sort of what I can share with them in a positive way. And I think now what's interesting is, like, as an uncle, I get to be the cool uncle that lives in New York, and they love and enjoy that aspect of me. But I can also slow down and really ask them what's going on for them, how they're feeling, and demonstrate just a level of awareness that I didn't have before. And it's interesting how they relate to me now. I definitely feel our relationship is much stronger. And then they see me differently, which is interesting to see, to sort of observe.
Beautiful. And so, how do you feel that the environment that they're growing up in compares to one that you grew up in? I heard you
I did,
podcast
yeah.
say that was a difficult environment for you growing up.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, growing up, I didn't, my father through various circumstances wasn't really around, wasn't really present in my life. I mean, he was, but I struggled to connect with him and really see him as a father, as a result of different situations or circumstances in my childhood. And so in many ways I had to, sort of take it upon my own, to, I guess what I did when I was younger was I just sort of defaulted to work and being able to control, as much as my environment as I could. And I learned to depend very much on myself, because I knew that's the one thing, that's one person that I could depend on, which inevitably had tremendous benefits, growing up, work ethic and everything else. But I also realized that probably I didn't get to evolve as much as my ability to allow people to help me. And so I think one of definitely the thing that I observed the most is just the benefit that my nephews have having, two parents that are very much engaged. I mean, yesterday we were at the beach, and the guy that was helping us with the surfboards dropped some money on the ground, and my younger nephew picked it up and returned it to him, and my brother said, you demonstrated family values that are important to us, and it just really resonated how much my older brother, as a function of the circumstances we had, has focused very much on his creating an environment for his children that is very different than the one that we had. And it really warms my heart to see the benefit that they have from my brother's awareness of how to create a different type of environment for his boys.
Beautiful. So I did a podcast, episode 35, and we're up to 39 with this, Lucas, and I talked about myself and got some questions from people, and one of the things somebody asked was, who are my influences? And I brought up the Evryman podcast being an influence, and actually an influence for doing this podcast. And my next question is borrowed from that podcast, and it is, who is Lucas Krump today? Who are you, man?
Whew, that's a big question. It's probably I probably ask myself that same question every day. Who I am today is very much the product of the 39 years of existence that I've had up until this moment. I would say who I am today is exactly who I'm supposed to be. And I know that sounds like a vague, kind of a vague, nebulous answer. But what I mean by that is, I've learned over the years to accept exactly what's happening to me in the moment as what it should be for me. And it's allowed me to move away from sort of grasping for things that I don't have, or moping about circumstances that aren't ideal for me, or whatever it may be. And I think in that, who I am today is probably the best version of myself. There were times in my life when I was younger when I was very much lost. I was so consumed by my own self and my own anger about my childhood, and my own disdain for other people's success, that it really clouded my ability to be who I am. And so today, having done a lot of work to move through that, I'm incredibly happy about the person that I am in this exact moment. And so, 39 years old, who's Lucas Krump? He's a kind, generous man that, laughs a lot and doesn't take himself too seriously, but also has an enormous heart. And in many ways is still working to open up my heart, and allow the love that people have for me in. It's probably one of my biggest struggles. And I accept that that's exactly where I'm at, that being at that point in this journey is just where I am, and it's okay.
Beautiful, man. And what are some of the tools that you've worked through to achieve that state of being?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's so many tools, right? I think, it'd be easy for me to default to talk about, the tools that sort of Evryman has brought me, which are incredibly important, right? The idea of slowing down, connecting, and sharing, and opening up has really allowed me to develop a level of awareness about myself that I haven't had previously. But I think beyond those tools, I think the one thing that's been really incredibly impactful is just mindfulness, and the ability for my own self to become aware of how I feel, and sort of slowing down enough to actually allow myself to feel whatever it is that I feel in any circumstance, and then becoming incredibly comfortable with that feeling. That to me has been probably one of the most important tools that I've gained, because it's so easy to be in a difficult situation, or to feel sadness, or to feel joy, or whatever it is, or just struggle, pain, and to immediately default to this, like, oh my God, what's happening? How do I make sense of all of this? And that used to be my default. And, when I was younger in my 20s, like, as soon as I would have those feelings, then I would go to, drugs or alcohol or whatever it may be to try to avoid having those feelings, and sort of distance myself from them. And it was only, up until probably 4 or 5 years ago that I started to really become very self-aware of what that sort of uncomfortableness ultimately led to, and how destructive that behavior was on me as an individual. And so, yeah, for me, some of the key tools are mindfulness, awareness of my emotions and how I feel. And then beyond that, the more practical things in terms of, exercise and gym, and, creating time just to be okay with everything that's going on around me.
Awesome. Diving a little bit further into that, how do you reconcile to just sit with a feeling instead of doing that very macho thing of trying to fix it, or shun it away, or put it in a box and move on? What do you think is the key to being able to sit with the feeling and acknowledge the feeling, and give it its time, so that it doesn't all of a sudden bubble up and come out and at the worst possible time?
Right. And I think for me, well, first of all, it's not easy, and I don't want to be the one that claims for a second that I have it figured out, because there's still moments of complete discomfort, with certain circumstances. But I think what's helped me to accept my feeling is to understand the physiology of that, and the fact that our emotion is a physiological event, or reaction that our body is having, right? And that sort of allows me to say, okay, my brain can't necessarily control this. My mind can't necessarily control this, because my physiology is responding to a situation, and that physiology is then, the export of that is this emotion that I've decided in my mind to either make it good or bad, right? And so what's been really, really powerful for me is just to understand that, oh, wow, my emotions are just a physiological reaction to some circumstance. And I've chosen to label that response, that emotional response, either good or bad. And so, understanding the science of it allows me to become more comfortable in understanding what's happening within my body in this moment, and then I can manage it. Then I can work with it. but I used to, have extreme discomfort. I would go to my head, oh my God, this sucks. Let me not experience this. Boom. Let me go try to distract myself from what's going on through any variety of things that are out there to distract us, be it, technology, food, drugs, alcohol, women, the list goes on and on. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's one of the key things Don Batiste, who's a clinical psychologist that we've had on, taught me, is that our emotions influence our feelings, and our feelings influence our behavior. And like you say, if you're just ignoring the feeling and you're just going with your body's reaction or trying to get rid of it, and then your behavior just happens, and then you go back and look at it and go, why did I do that silly thing? Actually, if you take
Right.
yourself back a step and understand your feeling and understand your reaction, then you can adapt your behavior and adapt the way you feel, and then things go much better. And on the
Right.
rugby field, that's powerful because things don't always go your way, but it's a metaphor for life, and it's so valuable.
Well, it very is. And I think, we've gotten so caught up into thinking that we're always supposed to feel good, right? I mean, thinking that everything is always supposed to be, that we're always supposed to be happy. Everything's always supposed to be a positive moment, right? And we sort of latch on to that positive feeling that when that when an event happens that may not be as positive, we immediately have a reaction to that. And so, I constantly work on sort of disassociating myself from the experience and just allowing whatever experience is happening to just be. Because if I get too sort of addicted to the positive, then when the negative happens, it's gonna overwhelm me, and that can be very detrimental to whatever's happening in my life in that moment.
Yeah, that's awesome. Off air, we were talking about surfing, and you said how you'd been away from surfing and now you're back into it, and maybe that you needed to take a extended year surfing holiday to be in a position that you want. And we also talked about the parallels between trying to master surfing and with hunting, that if you're in your head and you're focusing on other things, it just doesn't work. If you'd like to delve deeper into why you think doing that sort of truly focusing task is really an important practice.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a well, first of all, I think learning as an adult is just an incredibly interesting, exciting opportunity that we have. I think one of the things that defines me as an individual is curiosity. I'm totally curious of anything and everything, and I'm totally accepting with the fact that I may fail at any one of the things that I become curious at trying, or curious to try or do. It's like whatever, it's just that just is. But I think beyond the learning, which I would encourage anybody to do, because I think what happens to ourselves as males is, we become so captivated by our primary task at hand, and that task, i.e. our job, to provide for us, right? And we sort of fill the majority of our brain with that one thing, which really eliminates our opportunity to put other things in there, right? And so I do think it's incredibly important to find activities and experiences that force us to move away from the primary day-to-day thing that we consume ourselves with, and focus us on having a different experience, or focusing our mind on learning a different skill or a task. But I think as adults, it's incredibly hard to do that. And so for me, I've tried to focus on activities that force me to have to slow down, to have to focus on that one thing, or else I won't be successful. Surfing is a great example. If I'm, paddling into a wave and, I'm thinking about, that 10:30 a.m. meeting that didn't go so well, or all the other things that I have going on, there's a high probability that I'm not going to catch that wave, right? If I'm, slowing down, out in the woods or something, hunting or whatever it may be, and I have to calm down and I have to slow down and try to figure out how to, shoot, or, I'm not a huge hunter, but I definitely know lots of guys that are, it's not going to go well, and so finding those activities that will allow you to focus your attention and energy on something else, to move you away from your day to day, and then, having the the success or the feel or the sense of accomplishment when you are able to do that is just a great way to reinforce, you know, the need to learn and focus on other things than what we do every day.
Nice. I love that analogy how transferable it is. And I was just thinking about when you're learning something, it allows your body or it allows your physiology to identify when you're becoming reactive in your reptilian brain, and get out of that known knowledge, this is easy monkey brain, and become creative and more open-minded and find things and other avenues which excite you and spark creativity. Do you find that after a good surf, you come out and you're buzzing and you're ready to create some stuff?
Oh, I mean, undoubtedly. I mean, I think that probably, you know, unfortunately living in New York City, I don't get to surf as much as I'd like to. But with training, you know, I'm very, very active in the gym, weightlifting and you know, different types of cross training and things. And, you know, I find that, you know, I work with a trainer that is really, really focused on the fundamentals and pushing me to be the best, you know, at the singular motion or whatever it may be. And I find that, yeah, I mean, 7:15 in the morning before my day starts, you know, I'm in the gym trying to have a perfect power clean or whatever it may be. And it is such an incredible way to start the day. And I know definitively if I've had a good workout or not. If I've had it, you know, there is a sense of euphoria. There's a sense of accomplishment. There's a sense of desire to sort of get back there tomorrow and do better. And that is, you know, that to me is the best way to start my day. You know, as I launch into all the other things that I've got to deal with on, you know, between 9 and 7 p.m.
Beautiful. And is there any other way that you'd like to start the day or win the day or set up a good pattern for the day?
Definitely meditation. You know, and I go in and out, admittedly. I mean, I know the benefits of meditation and it's been an incredible practice for me. But you know, it's hard. It's a hard practice to slow down and repeat, but I try to meditate a couple times a week. And interestingly enough, one of the, you know, my meditation practice is actually just sit completely naked. Yeah, you know, my girlfriend's always like, hey, what the heck are you doing? but you know, the intention behind that is very specific. You know, oftentimes we use clothes as protection, right? And so when we are naked, we're in our most vulnerable state, right? Mm-hmm. More often than not, like if you were to walk outside naked right now, you would immediately have a tremendous sense of vulnerability, right? And shame and everything else that's going to come up for you. And so for me, I actually sit naked and I allow myself to feel exactly how I feel in that uncomfortable moment of being, you know, the guy, you know, sitting in a meditative state on my floor, totally naked. And I become incredibly aware of how my body feels and how my mind is reacting to how, you know, this practice. And what it's allowed me to do is become more and more comfortable with being uncomfortable, more and more comfortable being in a vulnerable position. You know, it's an amazing sort of activity. I know it sounds completely out there, but I've had tremendous benefit from it.
Awesome. And our friend Chris Desmond will love that. His podcast is called Uncomfortable is Okay. So yeah, that's awesome. So how did Dan Doty come into your life and why did Evryman become a thing?
Yeah. It's funny. We answer that question a lot. Dan and I, ironically, we were on a cruise ship of all places at an event called Summit at Sea. I don't know, some of the listeners out there might have been to. It's an incredible event, brings together you know, different types of social entrepreneurs, activists, entrepreneurs, interesting people from sort of all walks of life. You know, and it's a combination of speakers and, you know, sort of community discussions and engagement. And it used to be on a cruise ship. Now it's actually, I think it's gotten so big that they do it in Los Angeles. But I was actually on that, and Dan was as well. And Dan and I were both lined up to go see Esther Perel, who's just an incredible, therapist and relationship expert. Speaks a lot about modern relationships. Her books are, The State of Affairs is a great one. I think it just came out. But Dan and I were in line waiting to hear Esther, and I looked over, and he had his name tag said Man Camp Bozeman, Montana. And ironically, that past summer, this was in 2016, I had just visited Bozeman, Montana for the first time, and I'd fallen completely in love with it. Absolutely. Just, it's hard to believe this place exists. It's just such an incredibly breathtaking, beautiful piece of our country. And I was completely enamored by it. And so I immediately started talking to Dan, wow, Man Camp, what's that all about? And that sort of segued into a solid, 45-minute discussion. I think we eventually did sit down to see Esther speak. But for the rest of the cruise, Dan and I, really found as many opportunities as possible to connect. I was really blown away by his awareness of men and the struggles that men have, and his real passion for that. I was at a point in my life where I had just kind of woken up, and it became very aware to me that in order for me to grow as an individual, I was going to have to create a new community of men that I interacted with. Growing up without a father, I didn't have a lot of positive male influences, and the ones that I did have, were good in many ways, but they weren't necessarily enable me to grow and learn. And so Dan came into my life at this very unique moment. And on the cruise ship, I think he asked me, he said, I'm doing this retreat with my friend, Sasha Lewis, who's the other Evryman. I'd love for you to come, and I've always been open to different types of retreats, different types of community building activities. And so, about a month after that first meeting on the cruise ship, I went up to Racebrook Lodge, which is kind of the home of Evryman in many ways on the East Coast, and sat in a circle with 25 guys, many of which Dan and Sasha knew from their previous time together in a men's group in New York City. As well as individuals just from, the larger community that Sasha was a part of. I didn't really know anybody. We spent 2.5 days, talking, connecting in many different ways. It was funny because we actually called the retreat open source, because Dan and Sasha didn't necessarily even have an itinerary for the weekend. So we thought, we'll just open source it. After that 2.5 days was done, I was completely blown away by a couple of things. One was the desire that so many of the men had at this retreat to want to connect, but I was also really taken back by the inability for many of them to connect and really have the tools that they had. A friend of mine that was actually the one friend that I did ask to join me at one point, during the weekend, stopped me and just said, "Hey, I'm incredibly grateful that you asked me to come." And having done this type of work previously in various capacities, it wasn't new to me, but it was new to me, the response that so many of these men had. And in that moment, I just knew that I wanted to use, my skill, my talent to help Dan and Sasha realize what their vision was. And I just offered it to them. I said, "Hey guys, I would love to help in any way, shape, or form bring this work to more people." And that's really when Evryman started. And time it's crazy to think that we've only been doing this for a year and a half, 20 months, because this community has just grown larger than I ever could have anticipated in this such a short period of time.
Nice. What was the feeling going in, and what was the feeling coming out?
I think the feeling going into that retreat was definitely fear, but it was a real desire. I mean, I was at this point where at that point, I think I'd lived in New York City for about 4 years. And, I moved to New York City after having spent 10 years living overseas. I was 32 years old at the time. New York City it's an incredible place, but it's a very lonely place in many ways. And I think what I did was I defaulted to, finding a girlfriend. And that girlfriend really became my life for a number of years. And I didn't have that opportunity to meet a lot of other guys and make friends. And so going into that weekend, and I was just coming out of that relationship, I really wanted to try to connect with some guys and try to make some new friends. Almost to the point where I was thinking I was going to have to force it. I didn't really know what was going to happen, but I knew that I wanted to come out of that weekend just having better acquaintances, having better guys that I could connect with and relate to in New York City. And little did I know I got way more than that. I got my life's work in many ways.
Nice. And you mentioned that word there, work, and it's often what you guys are talking about is doing the work, and in the men's groups turning up to do work. What is
I don't know. I mean, do you like the word? The word work is such a weird. I think we work has so many different connotations in our society. I kind of like men's work, and then there's moments where I think, well, what does men's work even mean? I mean, what's your response to the word work?
Well, for me, the word itself, it's funny. Where I'm from in New Zealand, we roll our R's, and so saying work is always something that identifies me out to the rest of New Zealand. That you talk weird, but the actually doing the work, I think I think the reason why Evryman resonates really well with me, and I'm actually going to be going to a men's circle here in Ballina, where I've moved to next week to just see what it's like. But to actually break down your life and break down your thoughts and then find your areas which keep tripping you up, I think, and then you can work on them is where that comes in for me. But what does it mean for you, and how does it follow into your life?
Yeah, I mean, doing the work, and I guess we kind of use that until we've until we figured out a better name. But for me, it implies a level of awareness that one has about the things that aren't working. And then the desire to do the work, to work on those areas of your life that aren't functioning as well as they should. It can be relationship, it can be with your partner, it can be relationship with your father, it can be relationship with your friends, your family, whoever, relationship with yourself in many ways. But it's just that I think in many ways it's the awareness that one has about areas in their life that they need to change and or improve. And that's not to say that there's this other word that comes up a lot, like I want to be a better version of myself, and I get that, and I think we all strive to do that, but in some ways you don't want to imply that the current version of yourself is bad. Yeah. Right? There's a real acceptance that we need to have of exactly who we are in this moment, and not judge that and not put that down. There's always a desire to improve or to change, but there's also a real need for us to accept exactly who we are and be totally okay with that. Because that, to me, that's probably some of the hardest work that one can do, is to accept who they are.
Absolutely. changing tact ever so slightly, but it's still on the same topic of men and men's health and men's mental health. And I was just scrolling through Instagram prior to this, and you had a post a couple of ones ago about suicide, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to get one of you guys on board, because having that mental health state be better hopefully will prevent suicides in our country. And so 2 years ago, preparing for Movember, I grew a big beard and then shaved it off and created a video for YouTube. And I put the song by a New Zealand group called Homebrew, and I think the lyrics of the song really speak to the state of a lot of men within New Zealand. And so it goes like this. It says, "See, in my country, the suicide rate's high as a junkie. And it's funny because we're the ones who invented the bungee. Now we think that we're so hard, we even jump without the rope. We're tied around our throat like a true Kiwi bloke. It ain't a joke. We're living in this macho show. Nobody our hearts broke. World where there are no humans, only machines. And the bars talking their barcodes. Hard, bro, but we know that we aren't, though. We mumble a bunch of bullshit, sports scores and weather talk. And if we say that it's cold, that's a metaphor. Because we as men, we're never taught to express ourselves, or better yet, accept ourselves. So we're stressing out trying to be anybody except ourselves, mess around trying to hide what we're depressed about. Got to take X amount of ecstasy to let it out. We're dead men trying to pretend that we're all hard as bedrock while we watch two half-naked dudes stuck in a leg lock. As 10 dogs compete for one bitch on heat, like a cockfight to prove who's got the biggest beak. Shit is bleak, no humanity, only who's the manatee. Is this reality or a parody? And so I think, especially in New Zealand, where we've got a lot of isolation, and especially in our rural community, the suicide rate is even higher. What do you think is so important about creating deeper connection between men?
Well, I mean, I think what's so important about it is that it's completely normal and natural, and in many ways, it's our resting state as a human being, right? I mean, 50 million years ago, 10 million years ago, 5 million years ago, 1,000 years ago, whatever it may be, we lived in community, right? Men hunted in groups. Men and women lived in communities. They supported one another. You can look at the Native American culture. They had elders and they had tribes, and we as human beings, our resting state is to be in community and to be connected. And somewhere along the way, we started to get stuff, and then everything shit the bed, really. We sort of moved away from living in community and being connected, and started looking at ways that we could sort of be the king of our own kingdom. And that's really where a lot of this started. And we've now gotten to the point where we actually don't really know how to operate within community and how to operate within a tribe. The skills that are required in terms of being open and honest about how we're feeling about what's going on for us. There's a real atrophy there because we don't practice it anymore. To me, there's nothing more, for me, there's nothing more sacred than being able to connect with the group of guys and have that ability to connect at the deepest level, but then to also, have a laugh and go and have a bit of adventure or whatever it may be. It's a sort of ability to have this full spectrum of relationship. And that's when life becomes interesting. It's sad to me that we've sort of convinced ourselves that we don't need that we don't need that connection, that we don't need that sense of community, that we don't need to be open and authentic and honest with how we're feeling, because that right there is what's killing us. Men are hurting themselves and they're hurting other people, and I truly believe that the source of that is that we aren't connected anymore. We're not connected with ourselves, and we're certainly not connected with other men. Really, that's a big part of what Everyman's mission is to create community, and also to create acceptance and awareness for the simple act of being an open, honest, and authentic with other men, and practicing that behavior on an ongoing basis.
And so having this group around you, does it create a level of accountability for your actions and feelings?
100%. I think it creates a level of accountability, simply because you learn to, that community that you create is they want you to succeed, right? They're your tribe. They want to lift you up, and they also want to pull you up when you need it. And so if that community sees you not, fulfilling what you've committed to, then, they're definitely going to hold you accountable. But beyond that, I think that community also gives you the understanding and perspective that we don't often have, or maybe we don't often want, right? And so the ability for somebody to tell me openly and honestly what my behavior looks like to them, and me having to accept that is a real practice, because I think, more often than not, we immediately would default to defending ourselves or justifying ourselves. And so the practice of just allowing one to accept the feedback that comes to them, and do with it what they choose is a very powerful practice.
Nice. That's really cool. And you speak about tribe there, and Ben Logan, who's replicating what you guys are doing over in New Zealand with Logan Law, and I believe he's talked to Dan a few times. But we spoke about a rite of passage being missing from our society. Do you think that having a men's circle with elders is something that creates a rite of passage, as opposed to, in my experience, going to university and getting drunk for 3 years before realizing that I was doing everything wrong, and then taking another 4 or 5 years to figure out what it was that I was doing wrong.
Right.
And like you said, you went on an adventure for 10 years, but whilst there was so many positives out of it, there was areas that you were thinking, well, what's going on? Do you think that having a group around you creates a better rite of passage, I guess?
It definitely does, and people often talk about the notion of rite of passage, and I think that in many ways, yes, like in our modern day world, the notion of sending a boy out into the jungle, for 24 or 48 hours, or going on your first hunt or whatever it may be. Like, I think that those are some of the more traditional notions of rite of passage that exist, that we oftentimes default to. And I think there's part of me that wants us to acknowledge that we don't live in a similar culture, so we may not have that, and we may not necessarily need to replicate that. I think what is important is that people, or men, define what their rite of passage is for themselves, whatever that experience looks like, and then try to create that. But I don't necessarily think that we have to sort of default to these, kind of, Neolithic or whatever it may be, sort of more, more structured rite of passage, more tribal rites of passage. Although if individuals want to partake in those, I'm a huge advocate of it. I just think it's important to identify what your own rite of passage is, and then actualize on that. And I think in many ways that men can sort of go through a constant state of rite of passage. If you think about this moment that distinguishes sort of a movement from one sort of behavior to the next, or from one sort of age to the next age, I think that we as individuals are constantly growing and evolving, and so there's many rites of passage that we can partake in on an ongoing basis. Really, in some ways, I feel like every Tuesday night for me at my Evryman group is a rite of passage, because I'll learn something and I'll sort of move to another stage or another level in my life.
Absolutely, and I feel exactly the same. Just tuning into Everyman podcast every week, hearing somebody else's perspective, or finding those things that resonate with your own life, and like I say, becoming more accepting of who you are and where you've been and what your journey has been up until this point, and going forward.
Yeah, and I think if I think about it, like, there's one part that says, oh, like, let's default to some sort of prescribed activity that we believe is a rite of passage. And then, and then we have some relationship with whatever we think the outcome of that is going to be. Right. Versus, like, oh, I'm going to go and, stick my hand in a hole of fire ants and I'm going to bear that pain. And then, if I'm able to accomplish that, then I'm immediately going to be thrust into the next, realm of my life. That may very well be, but one could ask, like, did that act accomplish the belief that we thought it was going to, or could it be something more subtle? Could the simple act of being completely honest and authentic with your parents in terms of your relationship with them, or with yourself, could that be a rite of passage without having to sort of go through this more outward, projection of what we think a rite of passage should be? I don't know, but it's just certainly something to think about.
Absolutely. It might not necessarily be the act, but be the change of mind or state that's the outcome of that. Is that what you're getting at?
Exactly. Because I think when we take that approach, we can look at many different events as rites and passages in our life, and we can honor them in the same way that we would in something that's more structured or more prescribed.
Nice. So one of your journeys into the world was playing rugby in Uganda. How does someone from the States get into rugby, and two, why Uganda, and was it because they played rugby there, or because you were playing rugby and you thought, hey, I'll give that away?
Rugby is a passion of mine. Funny enough, I went to an all boys Jesuit school in Kansas City, and I was a big guy. In high school, I was, in gridiron, as you guys call it. I was a tackle. But unfortunately, the guy in front of me in the roster was about 2 times as big as me, and actually ended up playing at Notre Dame, which is one of the most predominant, football schools in the United States. So it was. I wasn't going to play very much, unfortunately, due to circumstance.
Yeah.
But I definitely wanted to. I definitely wanted to. Partake in team sports. So I actually played gridiron. But then I also played rugby as well. And in my town, there was a men's league, which was really my first introduction to rugby, and really fell in love with the game. And I think just something about the I forget the word, but rugby is this, very aggressive sport played by gentlemen. Right. And I really appreciated the camaraderie, that the team had, and the level of respect that one had on the pitch, for the team, for the opposing team. And I just really took to it. I played for many years. So did my younger brother, throughout high school and then college. And then, actually, when I moved overseas about 22, 23, I was still playing at the time, and the first country that I ended up in was Uganda. And I played at a pretty high level, and so when I got to Uganda, one of the ways that I was going to sort of first meet people and make friends was to play rugby. And I just sort of rocked up to the rugby club and said, "Hey guys, I got boots. Where do you need somebody?" And it was just it was such an awesome experience, because there was this immediate sort of shared understanding of the game, and what the game represents. And I was very, it was funny because I'd never really it had always been told that. I always kind of felt that in, at various tournaments and different things, but to really put that into action, and be welcomed as part of a team for, a few months, it was an incredible experience. I think it was probably one of the last times I played 15s actually. So you could say I probably ended my rugby career in Uganda in many ways.
Nice. And you told Dan an interesting story about the realities of a country like that with the rugby club getting broken into or something like that.
Yeah. No, that was a real moment. People always ask me, what are things you remember? I'm incredibly fortunate in Kansas. I always say, people are like, wow, you've traveled abroad a lot. You've traveled overseas. Well, if you grow up in Kansas, you you sort of, you want to see the rest of the world. And I took it to the extreme. I think definitely one of the most profound was Africa, for many, many ways. But one of the stories that I do recall was just, the relationship with life that exists in Africa. It seems like the death is something it's so commonplace as a function of disease or war or whatever it may be. And we were playing, we had a game one weekend, and on Monday we sort of debriefed on the game and things that had happened. And the rugby coach said, somebody left the clubhouse open over the weekend, and unfortunately, one of the local villagers snuck into the clubhouse and stole a bunch of beers, and then got drunk, and the guards shot him. So don't leave the clubhouse unlocked. And I just remember in this moment, I was like, "Holy shit!" That is such an extreme event, but it really was very endemic of the fact that death is so much a commonplace. I mean, in our life, I don't know what the outcome of that was, but it really resonated with me in many ways.
Yeah, no, that's freaky. And you said one of the last times you played 15s when you're in Singapore, did you give 7s or 10s a go?
I did play a bit of 7s in Singapore. In Hong Kong, all I did was hang out in the south stands for the tournament. That's about the most rugby I played in Hong Kong. But no, I did play a little bit of 7s when I first got there. But the thing I found was just, rugby is an incredibly fun game when you're fit and you're strong, and when you're not fit and you're not strong, it's not fun. So I held on as long as I could, but eventually I had to give it up. But I'm a big I watch a ton of rugby now, and certainly am a real advocate of the sport in many ways.
No, awesome, man. It's exciting to see USA Sevens really doing great things on the circuit. They've been in
the World Cup is next month, actually, in San Francisco, or this month in San Francisco. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be there because we have an Evryman event. But a bunch of my buddies are from when I used to play. So it's been interesting watching, as you mentioned, and been just watching the team sort of progress and grow. I mean, the US 15s team just beat Scotland. I don't know what side Scotland had for the game, but I know we were, it was a particularly proud moment for the US to beat a rugby playing nation for the first time ever.
No, that's epic, and especially because Scotland did pretty well this year in the Six Nations. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah, it'd be cool if that was a full strength team. Um,
One of the questions that I had for you, and sorry to flip it around, but I think one of the things that what's been really cool for us is that the level of interest that we've received, in Evryman from Australia and New Zealand. This is the first podcast that we've done, that's particularly focused on the region, but we have had a ton of guys that have reached out to us. I think we have a couple Everyman groups down there now, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on like why that is, what we could do to help build the community in Australia, because it just seems like that there's a real interest.
Yeah, and I was looking on your page, and so there's a group in Melbourne and one in Dubbo, and because I was seeing if there's anyone around here. As I said, I'm going to a men's circle, which is meeting monthly in the town I'm in next Wednesday. So I think probably as a country that it prides itself on masculinity and on we've got a sort of a thing in New Zealand and Australia that's sort of she'll be right attitude and getting on with things, but I think the level of suicide is really scaring a lot of people, and Movember movement is pretty strong, and I think it's something that resonates with New Zealanders quite well. That what facial hair can you grow, and it's a way of sort of getting the openness and the ability to talk under the radar by simply chucking a moustache on, and it's why I do it every year, because as an optometrist you get people come in and you look a little bit silly, but it sparks a conversation. And so I think that having had that for a number of years, when something like Evryman comes along that's taking it to another level, I think as men we're ready for that, and we're ready to find something that can bring us together and take us to a deeper level, as opposed to, like I said, just talking about the weather or the rugby score from the weekend.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because it's like Everyman certainly doesn't replace that. I mean, there's space in our lives for that chat. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I'm a Adam Garoni in November. It's been incredible to see what those guys have been able to do in terms of raising awareness for mental health. And I think one of the things that we focused on is moving the sort of awareness to actual action. Everything we focus a lot on creating awareness, but we're way more focused on the actual action, right? So how do we actually solve this problem at the root? And so we're huge supporters of November and what they're doing. We certainly, believe that the work that we're doing as well helps address the suicide rate, among other things. I mean, the suicide is just one. It's sad, and it's painful to look at those statistics. But there's so many other people that are impacted by mental health, be it families, be it partners, colleagues. And I think when we as men take our emotional wellness, that's what Everyman, that's what we call it. When we take our emotional well-being seriously as we do, working out or, performing at our job, when we take that seriously, we can really better ourselves and better our communities and really then actually support other men, and helping them to address, the challenges and the struggles that are holding them back, and then ultimately could lead to, an event that we don't want.
Yeah, I think also another appeal for Kiwis and Australians is the way that you've framed Everyman in terms of the open source retreats, the expeditions and things like that. I think it's another thing, that sense of adventure is quite exciting, and that was when I heard Dan talking to Joe Rogan, that was how I sort of got sucked in. I was like, oh, this sounds really cool, and then actually the concept of Everyman is guys talking, and it's a great concept, and I think that's what draws you in, and then what you get back out of it is even greater, and that sense of, wow, I can do so much more, and I can, where I'm at's great, and from here I can move forward with power. I think that's why it's a great concept.
Absolutely. And I think, another core belief that we have at Everyman is that, we our focus is creating awareness for men's emotional wellness, and identifying practices that help further that. And a core of that practice is obviously a weekly meeting, a men's group, as it's traditionally called, but we don't have a real, we're a decentralized organization. Like, we support groups all over the world, but collectively those groups decide how they want to focus their group. I mean, we have a set of agreements, and we have tools that we provide those groups, but the group itself decides what's best for the group. And so a big belief that we have is we want other groups that may exist on their own, independent of Everyman, to actually become part of Everyman, because we know that collectively as a organization, if we can unify the voice, of all these disparate groups, as well as the Everyman groups that start, organically, that we help start, we think that unification is what can really collectively raise awareness. So we have a lot of Everyman groups that are, they may be your men's circle that you're going to, next week, that want to make that group the best possible group that they can have. And so they actually become an Everyman group, and we can provide them tools and resources and coaching, they go to retreats and everything else, to make that experience the best possible experience that it can be. I mean, the thing I always like to think about is, like, if you're going to be in a group, why not make that the best possible group that it can be? Like, if you're going to go to the gym, why only work out halfway?
No, that's awesome, mate. So where do people find Everyman and yourself and Dan and Sasha? Where do they find you guys?
Yep, everyman.co, Evryman.co, is our website. You can email me directly, Lucas, Lucas, at Everyman, Evryman.co. Email Dan, Dan, at Everyman.co. Follow us on Instagram. I think it's _Everyman, as well as Facebook. Just shoot us a note. I mean, like I said, we've got groups all over the world now. We've got retreats, lots of different activities coming up that are on the docket. We'd love to hear from everyone. I mean, we are, we as an organization are incredibly focused and committed to building the organization that can support these groups and men all over the world. But the support of the community, of individuals like yourself that are creating opportunities for us to raise awareness for what we're doing in their communities, is so important to us in this organization. And we're just incredibly grateful for the opportunity.
Beautiful, mate, and it's my pleasure. Before we go, what's something that you'd like to leave the audience with, or an ask of the audience, if you have anything?
I mean, the big ask would be, for men out there, I'd say just check in with yourself. Just ask yourself in a very open and honest way, like, am I holding back in areas of my life? Am I not telling somebody how I actually feel about them? Am I avoiding a confrontation or a conversation that could be, potentially difficult, but opening in many ways? I just say become aware of that. And once you're aware of that, ask yourself why. Like, why are you doing that? And then ask yourself what you want. And after that, you know, check out Evryman or check out another organization that can support you in helping to break down those barriers, helping to break down those walls, and create the opportunity for you to have more fulfillment in your life. But also, not, like I said before, no judgment on where you're at, because where you're at is where you're supposed to be.
Beautiful, mate. Thank you so much for coming on board, and it's awesome to connect. And hopefully, one day I can get over to you guys and join in on one of those.
With hope, we want or get a bunch of guys and invite us. To love to come down there and do a retreat.
Awesome, mate. Thank you so much. What another great episode that was, and pretty cool ask there at the end from Lucas, in terms of checking in with yourself and really making sure that you're being honest with who you are and accepting of yourself. It's quite interesting today. Chanel O'Sullivan, aka Just a Farmer's Wife, put up a tweet about people in New Zealand just saying, "G'day, yeah, how are you? Good," even though you're not good. And with that, I actually shared with her some of those Tom Scott lyrics, which I recited in the podcast. And we got to talking about, well, what do you say when somebody asks you how you are? And then I brought up the fact that often people will go, "Oh, I'm busy." And I tend to follow that up with, "Oh, busy doing what?" And it really catches people off guard, and it really makes them realise that that response I've given is just pretty automatic. And Chanel said how she tries her best, to not say she's busy, but then she also doesn't know what else to say. And so what I threw back to her was, perhaps when somebody asks you how you are, that's a sort of an opportunity to take a mental pause, check in with yourself, and then be honest with yourself and with the person who's asking. And from there, we can be more open and we can be more in touch with our feelings, and also take stock of where we are within our day, making sure that we're not automatic in our responses and automatic in what we're doing each day. Because something that both Dr. Libby and Tim Ferriss, and I'm sure many other wise people, reiterate is, you're only busy doing the things you say yes to. And I was first told that by my beautiful girlfriend Alex, and I loved it. It's super cool, and I'm glad to share it with you. Make sure to reach out if you took anything out of this podcast. It's always awesome hearing from people what they enjoyed, and also any ideas and tips or just feedback on our podcasts. We're up to episode 39 now, and hopefully we've got many to come. All our podcasts, of course, are brought to you by Waikato, and it's where you can find the whole catalogue of podcasts on our Facebook page, Waiketo, as well as various articles and things that I've found of interest. Also, I link my @Stag Vision Instagram page to the Waikato Facebook page, so you can see the goings on. And if you're after exogenous ketones, you can go to waiket0.proveitnow.com and get access to ketones. Otherwise, if you're in New Zealand where you can't quite get on that website yet, just send us through a message on Waiketo's Facebook page, and I'll be able to get you sorted out with exogenous ketones. Super stoked to be getting the jellies ketones shortly when Alex's mum comes over from New Zealand. Also, we've got the Mayan Mocha Keto Cream, which I'm absolutely loving in my morning coffee, changing it up a bit. It's a little bit easier than preparing the bulletproof coffee. Just chuck a little sachet in the bottom, stir in the coffee, and it's bloody delicious. There's a little touch of cayenne pepper in there, which is, it really is awesome on these cooler mornings. Obviously not as cool as New Zealand, but cool all the same. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to reach out if you've got any ideas, and thanks for listening. Be sure to give us a rating on iTunes. That means many more people can hear this. Cheers.